Welcome to I Like Beer, the book talk, where we discuss great books while drinking a beer. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier, with me, co-host of the I Like Beer, the podcast, Jeff Riccitelli.
Pleasure to be here.
And author, voice behind Cheers North County, Ryan Woldt.
Hey, everybody.
We met Ryan through our zeal for beer, but we quickly learned that we all three shared another passion, love of books. Out of this realization, these shared passions, we give you I Like Beer, the book talk. Our plan is to share a book and a beer once a month, rotating the host based on who's chosen the book. And like our respective podcasts, we thought we'd just put it out there and see if anyone listens. Does that sound about right, gentlemen?
Sounds like a good
Sounds
plan.
right.
Yeah.
This is our pilot episode. So before we crack our inaugural book and beer, I thought it might be a good...
Whoa. We were supposed to wait to crack that beer, Jeff?
Yes. All right, before we crack our fourth inaugural beer.
Yeah. All right. Before we finish our first beer and crack our first book, how about that?
Yes, there you go.
I thought it might be a good idea to quickly share a little bit about what type of readers we are. We're each a little or a lot different in how we approach reading. I found out as we talked about this. So tell us a little bit about yourself as a reader and what are you drinking, Jeff?
All right, so I'm drinking, most important question is I'm drinking a Dogfish Head Sequench Ale Session Sour. It's actually very tasty and refreshing. It's a good, I really enjoy it. So thank you for sharing that with me there, Jeff.
You're welcome.
So what type of reader am I? I read a lot. I will say that. It's not uncommon for me to read like a book a week, if not sometimes even more, depending on the time of year. But with that being said, sometimes I don't slow down. So I read, like I power through stuff. So the nice part about maybe doing this is it's forcing me to slow down a little bit on some of my books and appreciate them maybe a little more or reread things. I mean, I do that with certain books. If I find a book that I really, really like, I will go back and reread parts and stuff like that. But a lot of times I just motor through books. And I'll pretty much read anything that's, that is put in front of me. I would say my favorite, if I had to pick a favorite genre, is historical fiction.
Very good. Ryan, what kind of reader are you?
I'm actually somewhat similar in that I read really quickly and power through things, but I consume just a ton of different media. So, and I'm a little spurty about it. I might read 2 or 3 or 4 books in a row. You know, I read 2 or 3 or 4 newspapers or websites every day, and it just kind of depends on the zone that I'm in. And I'll pick up just about anything. I walk around the neighborhood and pick up books out of the out of the lending libraries, and just hope for some happy accidents. I was definitely the kid who was reading books under his desk during math class, which is why I don't have any sort of technical or science-based skills the way our guest later tonight will. But I would say I'm definitely the type of person who will read quickly and go back to it if it strikes a fancy, where I might read. I've read, I think, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five 25 or 30 times. You know, there's just a few books that have stuck with me, and that every time I read, I try to find something new and then move on to the next thing.
Good. I still have my lit major training from college, which means I'm usually reading 4 or 5 books at a time. So while I read fairly quickly, as my eyesight has changed, as I moved into my 50s, I can't see the whole page at once anymore. And since I turned 50 and moved into wearing reading glasses, I've noticed that I've also slowed down. I can't scan the whole page like I used to. And that's made me a little different type of reader, where I will puzzle over a sentence or a paragraph several times. I am a constant rereader. I go back to favorite books. I have books I read every 10 years. I have books I read every year. So that's kind of my approach to things. And I have a brain that works in questions. So my books are, every corner's bent, and I have notes all over them. I can't help but to write in a book. So, hey, Ryan, what are you drinking?
Yeah, I forgot to mention, I've got a It's Festastic by Bagby Beer up in Oceanside. I've been kind of saving it, and I thought in honor of the dying fest season and a celebration beer and in honor of this epic journey that the book we read tonight was about, I would finally crack it open. And I'm actually sitting outside, and I'm actually a little chilly, so it feels like a proper fest season.
Yeah, today was probably the first day that it felt like fall. I would agree.
I also have the Dogfish Head Sea Quench Ale, which is a connection to the book we'll be discussing.
Right.
So I think it's time to launch this project. Who will be playing the role of host tonight?
I think that would be me. I was the one who suggested this book, Waking Up on the Appalachian Trail by Nate Hankes, or N.B. Hankes, whichever he prefers as his professional name. And I'd like to introduce and welcome Nate to the show.
Thanks for having me on, gentlemen. Ryan, I appreciate you recommending the book to the crew, and I'm interested to get into this conversation and hear what you guys thought about it and tell you a little bit about the process.
Welcome, Nate.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
I powered through this book really quickly, and I already passed it on a few times over to different people. And so I went back this week and was rereading on the Kindle reader. So this is the first book I've ever read that wasn't like a real physical book. I've never read a Kindle book or anything. So that felt like an adventure in its own.
Yeah.
But Nate, I know this was a long process for you. You started kind of marinating on it years ago. When did you finally internally make the decision to write the book, and what was kind of that journey from that first paragraph to publishing it?
All right. So I think it was a compulsion where I would just sit down and I'd write and just not necessarily any sort of narrative or long form, but just thoughts and memories as they came to me. At a certain point, I thought, well, maybe if I directed this, it could become a thing. So I started going over my Appalachian Trail journal. I just had a little small little journal, waterproof. Every day I just leave a note like how many miles I hiked, what the weather was, where we ended up for the night, and just little notes from the day. And I kind of wanted to make a memento for my brother and my family. And I just typed out the journal and did like a short story from that day. And most of those are just pretty funny, just silly things that happened. And at some point I thought, well, this is actually, writing a book, the process of writing is very, it's like a sense of discovery, because not only am I like building something, but I'm also learning about myself at the same time. You guys read the book, I kind of go into deeper philosophical tangents and try to get to the root of things. So I was doing that in real time as I was writing. So it kind of became addicting in that sense. And I think there's a certain point where you tell people, yeah, I'm writing a book. And then you're on the hook. And then you're like, yeah, okay. All right, well, 8 years later, here's the book. You can read it now. But I think I just first started writing because I had to. And then it just became something that I would try to do, like, be disciplined with. And said, okay, I think there's a story here. Obviously, there have been other stories of people hiking the Appalachian Trail. I was like, well, I would like to share about the veteran experience. I think this could be valuable for not only veterans, but civilians as well that may not know veterans. And I think I have a good story to tell.
So when you say you had to write, you're speaking to that experience, that you had some things to work through, or part of your veteran experience coming back home.
Yeah,
is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, it was therapeutic in a way, because I think if you don't understand your subconscious, you're controlled by it to some extent. So a lot of the process of writing was to maybe understand some of the deeper forces that were making me maybe feel alienated from, the America I came back home to. I did serve a 14-month tour as a drone operator in Iraq. And I tell that in the book. There's scenes of that, some flashbacks, I would say. And that pretty much, that was the lens through which I basically just perceived the world that I came home to. And when I came home, a lot of things didn't make sense to me. So when I did get on the trail, I was having these conversations with people, and they were putting some things in context for me. And I think I did feel like a sense of responsibility to maybe share some of my understanding with a broader audience. So I think there was some of that as well that was compelling me to write.
So
So, and
oh, go ahead.
nope, I was just going to say, for anyone who ends up listening to this, just to clarify, Waking Up on the Appalachian Trail is Nate's story of hiking the trail with his brother Ben, and also reflections of his time spent in the military, which came before the trail. And we didn't actually ask Nate if he was drinking a beer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm off the gluten these days, but I got, just for the occasion, I got a hard kombucha.
Nice.
It's from a brewery called Flying Embers, and part of their sales go towards our firefighters. So I thought that was
Awesome.
a good, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, so I was going to say, and I appreciate the kind of the synopsis, because that was what I was going to kind of lead into. I think, I've read a handful of these different type of books, kind of these awakening books in different ways, whether someone's out taking a sailing trip or whatever else. But I really enjoyed, I thought you had a good balance between the hiking part of it, the flashbacks to your service part of it, which thank you for your service, and then also just kind of that struggle that you were going through, right? That awakening, or that kind of figuring out who you were as you came back. And I think it was interesting for me, because obviously I'm much older than you. But I think everybody, in whatever way they did that, had that time where you grew up in this kind of this insulated, and you reflect the values of where you grew up, and your parents, their values, and all that kind of stuff. And for, at least I know for me, it was going to college. Well, actually I was an exchange student, and I went and I lived in Costa Rica for a year in high school. So that was the start of that kind of finding yourself and finding your own place. So it was really interesting to watch the process as you went through it, and you could kind of, I think for me at least, I could reflect even on some of those things where you start to create some of your own identities. So I really appreciated it, and I found it to be a really interesting, and I enjoyed. I don't know where we're going on the conversation on the script part of it, but then kind of the realization you came to at the end. So I felt like it was there was like a start, you had your meal, and then you actually kind of came to some good realizations at the end, or some validations at the end, which was kind of cool.
Well, on that note, I know the book went through a lot of different drafts. I think that kind of leads right into this question, actually. And I know some of the earlier ones focused a lot more on the direct philosophical questioning and discussion that you were kind of going through at the time. Maybe at the time you were writing it more so than even on the trail. But the final version really dialed in a little bit more to your time on the trail and your physical experience, and then filtered in the philosophy over the top of that, your reflections of the trail versus the military. What was kind of the impetus for making that choice to refocus and make the military and philosophical journey you took more of a shadowy appearance, punctuated by kind of brief moments of like, hey, this is important and this is why I'm out here. But kind of the day-to-day, day one versus day 42 versus day 171 was kind of like, okay, this is where we are on the trail, and this is the progression we're moving on. Does that make sense, Nate?
I think so. I think, well, there is a responsibility of being an artist. You're getting access to someone's mind. They're kind of receptive and passive. And so I wanted to, first and foremost, I wanted to tell an entertaining story. But I also had this desire to share, some of my own realizations and some of the lessons that I had learned along the way. So it really became, all right, I don't want to be too didactic or pedantic, whatever.
Stop using such big words, Nate.
And I also want to, have it be an enjoyable read, a page turner, if at all possible. So, I'd do one draft and say, I can do better. And then so for instance, I said, well, I think I can do dialogue better. So I went and read a bunch of Stephen King books. He's really good at dialogue. And then I just took what I learned from his books. I'd take notes, and I'd just kind of try to replicate what he was doing. And then I'd go through, and then I'd play with dialogue. And then that next draft would have, I'd rely on dialogue more, maybe to advance to the next scene, or to kind of open a scene with dialogue, halfway through a conversation, and readers would catch up And that was a way to, instead of just telling the reader what's happening, kind of slowly letting their minds figure it out. And maybe that's more engaging for certain readers. So I was just playing with different aspects of the craft. And every time you iterate, you think, well, maybe I can make it a little sharper, or, you know, try these different things. And I did play around with things like foreshadowing to make it interesting. Actually, after reading Stephen King's book, Green Mile, that thing's a page turner. I don't know if you guys have read that one, but he's always referencing things that are about to happen. So I was like, okay, that's how you do it. And then I was trying to do some of that as well. So a lot of it was just wanting to be better each time. And then just trying to tell a story in a way that's not too heavy-handed, and just being nuanced with things. I feel like in the final draft, every sentence had a purpose. Every line was connected to something somewhere else to advance some like theme or narrative that was playing out in the book. So I was pretty happy at the end with what I had created.
You know, my favorite part in the middle of the book, chapters 12 through 14, you really seem to be going through this process of unlearning. I couldn't think of another term for it. That's a term when I teach Huckleberry Finn. I talk about Huckleberry Finn unlearning the social mores. And I thought you did a really good job of showing your struggle of, I've always been told this. I've always thought this, but here I'm meeting people that are kind of peeling away a layer of it. And I like that it wasn't this complete disillusionment or anger about it. It was more of just this unraveling as you started to consider other possibilities. And I thought that was really well done. You captured that feeling really well in the book of what that must feel like. And I know, you know, most of us have gone through that by a certain age where we start to, all these long-held beliefs start to peel off. Was that late in the drafting process that you kind of found that voice?
Well, I think,
honesty?
Yeah, certainly late that I found that honesty, and more, instead of honesty, courage to actually say these things openly and question, like, who am I to question, you know, the place I was raised or the beliefs of my community. But at a certain point, I just wanted to be like ruthlessly honest about what was going on inside my mind. And I feel like people gravitate towards that authenticity. I also wanted, like, I know other people go through this. You've all mentioned going through this similar process. I knew that people are going through this, especially now when everything's so confusing. It seems like the narratives are collapsing and everything everyone thought was true is brought into question, which, you know, for me, that moment was kind of going to Iraq and witnessing things that were different than what I had believed they would be. And so it's kind of a primer for people that are going to be going through that process. And I wanted to show them how I did it. And maybe if I can make it easier for them than it was for me, then I'll have done my job here.
It's funny that you just hit on that, because I had so many times in this book and so many things. I was like, I know the book was written, I want to say you were back like in the 2009, right? Was there something right there? But it's actually timely now. A lot of the stuff that we were talking about is stuff that's happening today, or is going on today, or we're seeing some of the ramifications today. So I found that really interesting, that even despite this book being, you know, over 10 years old in terms of, for me reading it, or us reading it, that there was so many things in there that you could just kind of draw or tie into what's going on today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, so on the trail, a lot of the book is about my relationship with this character, Dylan. He kind of became like a countercultural mentor type character who turned me on to different ways of thinking about things. And, you know, today we're seeing a lot of these countercultural ideas challenged, or I think there was recently something in the news. They were going to start some sort of patriotic education program.
Yeah. California, they tried to do it.
Yeah. So I think, you know, they're going against people like Howard Zinn, who are just telling a a history of America, but from a different angle. And I think there's value in understanding both sides of the argument, and then you can find a little more balance and peace instead of suppressing half of the story. And that's kind of a recipe for neuroses.
Right.
That's my statement. Like, if you're going to teach history, just teach the history.
Yeah. It's okay to have the conversation too, right?
Yeah,
it's okay I think that's where we become right now, that you don't have the conversation. You just talk over or talk down the other side. And I think that's kind of sad, because you don't get the big picture or get that chance to kind of see all perspectives.
Right. And
there's
then
concerned about what are people afraid of?
Yeah.
In sharing a whole story.
Right.
There's a saying that history is written by the winners.
Yeah.
And I think that applies somewhat there too, when you're talking about both sides of the story. Well, maybe they don't want one side of the story being told if they're the ones controlling the history books.
True. Yeah.
But also, you look at Nate. Nate grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up in the Midwest. And the history books that we read might have been different than the history book with the same title that someone read out here in California, where we are now.
Very well could be. Yeah.
Or in the Pacific Northwest, which is just a whole interesting side topic that we could go off on. But I wanted to kind of bring you back around to the trail, Nate. And you mentioned expectations for the military. I would imagine that during your time in the military, you were thinking about the trail or reading about adventurers, and at some point you got turned on to the trail. And so you started building this romantic kind of idea of what it would be like to hike and to, have the gear and to wear the pack and to do the thing. I mean, we read about it very viscerally in the book, but the aching muscles and the blisters or the hunger came on a lot quicker than I kind of imagined in the book. I'm wondering if it felt like that in real life, and if you really felt as unprepared as maybe you let on, and how much research had you done? And on that first day when you set out, did you feel prepared, and how long did it take before you were like, maybe not so much?
Well, I think first off, just having expectations. It's so funny because I went into the military with the same expectations. Oh, it's going to be so awesome to wear the uniform. They'll give me a gun. I'll be able to shoot Nazis in the face. All those types of thoughts. And then you realize,
Nazis.
yeah. And then you realize, okay, this isn't exactly what I expected. Maybe there's something different. And then, so the lesson I had to learn happened on the trail too. I had all these romantic notions, reading all these adventure stories when I was over in Iraq, just straight up a form of escapism. Really, I didn't want to deal with the reality of what was going on the ground. So I escaped to the books and the adventures and ideas of the future. And I think from there, getting on the trail initially, I had no idea how brutal. In my mind, I was like, oh, it's just like walking. But you're doing it with 45 pounds on your back, especially when you're first, in the rain, especially when you're not conditioned for backpacking just yet. Your muscles get sore super easily. We hiked up Katahdin the first day. It was something like a 5,000 foot elevation gain. And the next day, we were set up to continue hiking south, and I could barely walk on I could barely stand on my feet. They were so sore. I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to keep walking here. So it was way more brutal than I had actually anticipated. And that pain in the feet never subsided. There'd be days you'd wake up in the morning, and I mentioned it in the book, but it'd feel like your feet, they're so swollen. It's like a sausage casing. It's just like bloody ground chuck. And your skin is just like puffed, just full. And then you just put your socks on and tie your shoes as tight as you can. You're like, okay, we're going to hike 20 miles today. But people do it. That's just how it is. And everyone on the trail just kind of makes light of it because that's the reality of your day to day.
What are your choices, right?
Pretty brutal. So I think the joke of it is my brother, his expectations, and I brought this up in the book. Like initially he just thought it'd be something different to do. He didn't really have any job prospects after getting out of college. It's the Great Recession. He's like, well, I can buy some time by hiking this trail with my brother. And then at a certain point we had to get real because he was being pretty negative, and I didn't really want to have that around me out there. He's like, you know what? I just kind of imagined us like sitting around campfires eating beef jerky all the time. And that was definitely
him on a hike. I've been him on a packing trip.
Yeah.
Well, your brother Ben, he was going to try and join us tonight, and he might still, but he did send me a picture. He's having a water park emergency, and I don't know if you guys can see this, but he is certainly surrounded by water pipes and has a hard hat on. So I know he's working hard, but that's kind of related to something later in the book. But how did you did hike the trail with your brother, and you did meet this gentleman Dylan, who kind of becomes your unofficial sensei? How did they feel about the finished project of your book? You kind of speak for them to some extent.
Yeah.
And you mentioned being very honest with what was happening in your own head. You kind of project a little bit about their honesty and what they maybe have been going through at the time. Have you had a chance to chat with them or to talk to them about how that felt to them?
Yeah, so I actually brought that up with my brother this morning because we were talking about this, and he said he knew he had a negative attitude early on, so he's like, that was all realistic. And he said he enjoyed reading the book. He was happy that these stories were on the record, because I published this book 10 years after we actually hiked. So I was jogging his memory on some of these stories because he didn't keep a journal. So for him, he said he was okay with it. I haven't talked to Dylan yet. He knows the book is out. He's got a copy. And Dylan himself, we had those types of conversations over many months, and over the years, the conversations would evolve. And I've had a couple mentors in my life, so some of the lines that come from Dylan in the book are from other mentors that had come through the years. Just I wanted to, his character fulfilled the role of like the mentors in my life. So there was a little bit of basically two people in my life turned into one character in the book.
So you head out. I mean, the idea is you're in Iraq and you're thinking, I got to get to that trail. It's going to happen. We're going to make it happen. And you head out with this romanticized view, like Rousseau or Henry David Thoreau. You talk about that in the book. And very quickly, it's sore feet, aching back, wet, miserable. But you also went in, my formal training is in beer drinking and literature.
All right.
Characters in literature, they head off into the unknown, into the wilderness, and their epiphanies, their self-discovery happen as a part of that. But you went in with that purpose. You describe in the book, you went in to find some answers and to deal with some things. And then you met the suffering and the pain and the realities of a trail. Do you think that the sort of purposeful, I need to go get some answers, I need to figure some stuff out, was a hindrance or helping? At what point in the travels did it shift where you were able to sort that out?
That's a great insight. I think anytime you have an expectation, it's a bit of a hindrance because it prevents you from actually interacting with the moment as it is, right? You're constantly trying to get something from what's happening that's not actually there, instead of just responding to what's actually happening. So there was a certain point where I just had to let go and say, all right, there's some tedium involved with planning the hike. Eventually I gave that responsibility over to my brother so I could do more of the internal work and navel gazing that's required for some of the sort of stuff. I see you have the Dictionary of Mythology behind you on your bookshelf, and I've since become a fan of Joseph Campbell and his talking about, some of us have this call towards adventure, and I was feeling that call. And in Joseph Campbell's like hero's journey, he'll have, sometimes you will find a mentor that can help you along the way. And I think if I wouldn't have run into somebody who's been through that process before themselves, it would have been a pretty unhealthy outcome, honestly. So I feel like having a character like Dylan come in was exactly what I needed. And he kind of served as an outlet for that, whatever that impulse was. I was able to, in a healthy way, just through dialogue, get rid of some of that angst of like my longing for answers or knowing or knowledge. Like I was hungry for answers. And when you're going out into the woods, like you had alluded to before, it's like I didn't realize that what I needed to do was unlearn. Like I kept seeking knowledge, but there's no end to knowledge. So at a certain point you realize like it just keeps going, and at a certain point you just have to be comfortable with the chaos as it is.
I would like any former students to note the Joseph Campbell reference.
Nice.
Yeah. That's my man.
It's very good.
When I graduated, go ahead.
Go ahead. You're up. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when I graduated college, my father gave me The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell as a graduation gift, and neither one of us read it for at least 10 years after I graduated college. So
yeah, sometimes you got to wait till the time is right.
Yeah.
Timing has to be right.
Yeah,
that's
one of my
that's
once
true.
every 10-year books.
Yeah,
not
that's
Power
true
of Myth,
for books,
but,
Jeff.
Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that's true for books too, that sometimes you read a book and you're not ready for it, and something comes back around. We were talking earlier about the types of books we read, and I've certainly done that with books and with movies, where you see it or you read it and it's just doesn't click, and for some reason years later you pick it up again.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, and it fits to wherever you're at in your life. And
I've even had the opposite happen, where a book that I thought was the greatest book ever, I go back and reread it, and I'm like, why did I ever like this book? But I think it's exactly where you were at the time or what was going on in your life. Maybe it hit a chord. Yeah.
Third option of it clicks with you, but in a whole different way, because you're in a different place in your life. The world has shifted as well. Yeah. And that, to me, that's a sign of a great piece of literature, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is that it can speak to you and the times, and in a reread, whether again or in a different way, speaks to you. You know, Nate, you talk about, I guess I'm thinking about the end of the book, and it does get, you use the word didactic, so you used it, not me, but you do get a little bit didactic at the end. And I'm wondering, the audience there, or your intended audience, were you trying to talk yourself into your understandings there at the end? Were you thinking about other people that might be struggling with some of the unlearning that we've talked about? You really seem to be in a place where you've moved past, can I love America? And you've moved into this, how do I love America? How do I do it? It's flawed. How do I? And it does come across as you really trying to explain it. But I was wondering in my read of it, are you explaining this to yourself, or did you have an audience in mind there?
Yeah, I think the audience in my mind was always like my hometown, my family, my tribe. Well-intentioned, well-meaning, somewhat sheltered, Roman Catholic, conservative, and I feel like sometimes our beliefs and understandings can become stale, and things that we support, maybe at one time they were virtuous, but over time, circumstances can change, and suddenly this is a Joseph Campbell line, the virtues of the past can become the vices of the present. And I really wanted to kind of like shake people a little bit. And also I did feel a bit of a responsibility, like one of the things I opened the book with a quote from Alan Greenspan, where he says something to the effect of, I'm just going to say what's obvious to everyone, but no one will say it because it's politically inconvenient. The Iraq war is for oil. So I'm trying to bridge this gap between, all right, how everyone wants to grow the economy and get these better jobs, but that just requires more resources and more excess and more consumerism, which seems to be the root problem of us going into these wars and things like that. So I really wanted to have like an emotional impact with people, while also not just appealing to their emotion, but to reason and understanding as well. So I guess I just felt very strongly for the future of America and its health and just the community in general that there's got to be some sort of change in our understanding if the democratic experiment is going to continue. And when I was writing, I was still in that place, and I was very conflicted. I know it sounds lofty and preposterous, but if not us, who? So it was my attempt, at the very least. Yeah.
Sure. That relates to, if anyone's been paying attention to the news this week, Senator Sass had mentioned something along those lines of our place in the world as far as foreign policy goes. And I'm wondering if you found that there were some lasting lessons that you took from the trail and from your time in Iraq that meshed together into kind of the person and the writer that you've become now.
I mean, that would be, it's not super philosophical. It'd just be the character development of actually being able to like survive a combat type situation, and also to have the discipline to just sit down and write a book. So I think it's just the character development of being in the service, which I'm despite questioning the mission, I'm grateful for my time in the service and meeting the people I met and the experiences I had and the opportunities it has opened for me. And, the discipline and skill set and, character building and all of that, I think it's really set me up for success, I suppose.
That's interesting. My father served in Vietnam, and he always says kind of something similar in that while that day that he was drafted was a terrible day, he actually looks back fairly fondly with he feels like he learned the skills that enabled him to succeed there, even if maybe the day-to-day wasn't what he was hoping for. Jeff, you were going to say something.
Well, no, I was going to say, because he actually almost somewhat answered. I had a question I was going to ask, because in the book there were a couple of parts that, like I said, I that really kind of hit me. And one was very early on. I think you guys were meeting the character, or not, I guess they're not character, the person, Pat. They're true people, but Pat, and you guys were introducing yourself, and you basically said something like, my brother Ben over there just finished college, and me, I was in the Army for 4 years, just got out. You said, I looked down at my feet, unsure if I could say those words. I was in the Army with pride. And that was really sad to me that, what you'd gone through that. And so it sounds to me that maybe you've come to, a better appreciation or understanding of that. But I felt like that was something that was just really interesting to me, that coming out of where you'd come out of and going through what you'd gone through. And that was your initial reaction there when you're trying to introduce yourself,
Yeah. I mean, it puts you in an interesting headspace. I've talked to other veterans about this, and there've been veterans who they come home and they just feel so alienated from American culture. They have trouble looking people in the eye. And I know America does a good job, especially this time around, of supporting the troops and thanking them for their service.
Right.
Which I'm definitely indebted for. I don't know in different ways it could have gone poorly for me mentally if I had come home to like the welcome that some of the Vietnam veterans had. I really feel for those guys, but yeah, I think at this point, it was an experience. I think that I feel like soldiers, their heart's in the right place. They want to be of service. They want to help. And if they're being used unwisely by leadership, then I would hope that that's something that democracy can sort out. And it would require people who are willing to speak up about the perceived injustices or misuse and abuse that that would turn that tide eventually.
Very cool. I know, excuse me, on the I Like Beer podcast, they do this feature called Toast, Roast, and Pour One Out. And I'm wondering if we could apply that to your book and to the trail hike in a way, with briefly kind of one good thing you took from the trail, one bad, and one thing you were happy to say goodbye to while you were out there.
Yeah, though it gave me my, I want to toast to the trail angels out there, everyone who went out of their way to support a stranger along the way. We had people who would give us rides. People invited us into their homes to, they do our laundry, cook us dinner, give us rides up to the trail. So that really restored my faith in humanity and Americans in general, and just the goodness of America and Americans and the hospitality.
I like that idea that the trail will provide. I think that came up in there. Someone said that to you. And I thought that was really cool, and you kind of hit on that a couple more times, so that was neat.
Yeah, and it definitely that became a theme in my life.
Yeah.
Then and moving forward, your experience will provide you with what you need. So the roast is for bad things. Yeah. So yeah, it has to be the feet. There are people that it's pretty common to hike the trail and then your feet, it's almost 2,200 miles and your feet will permanently grow a full shoe size. I went through 3 pairs of shoes during this hike. They would just be tattered, worn out, and you just throw them in a trash can at the outfitters, and you get a new pair of shoes just right alongside the trail. So it's definitely, I really appreciate no longer waking up to that horrid pain in my feet. So I'm glad to be off the trail for that reason.
Nothing like breaking in a brand new pair of shoes with a 20-day mountain walk.
Yeah,
a 20-mile walk for the day.
Yeah, that's how you gotta do it. We actually lucked out because it rained the first month we were out there, so all the rough spots that we would have got blisters just sloughed away. So you didn't get blisters. It just took your skin off. So that was ideal.
Thank goodness for deteriorating flesh.
Yeah. And the pour one out. What's that? You'll have to explain that.
Kind of like one thing you're kind of emotionally happy to say goodbye to. I think is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, something you won't miss. Like it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you already obviously the shoes, but there's maybe something on a greater scale than the shoes.
Yeah. So I think that it's the story ultimately is a story of salvation, of just doing that internal deep work to come to peace with, maybe some of the paradoxes that we're all living in. And I'm just happy to leave a lot of that confusion and that suffering and pain behind. And I'm grateful for everyone along my path, whether it's on the trail, before or after, that helped get me across that finish line, because I wasn't having very much fun in life. And it was, I was in a dark place, and to finally be able to make it through the threshold, if you will, that opened up.
Back to Joseph Campbell. I like it.
Yeah. It opened up my world and became a whole new thing, and full of excitement and anticipation and positivity. So happy to leave the broken version of myself behind. And as a veteran, I think it's valuable to speak openly about these things, because a lot of veterans struggle with mental health issues. And I think that these are oftentimes like spiritual conditions. And a lot of, if you get into those types of methodologies, if you will. It can offer great healing for veterans, things like yoga and mindfulness and meditation. So I really like to speak about those things as well.
Awesome. Have you done any long hikes since you finished the trail? I know it was a long time ago, but your brother, have you guys thought about doing another through hike? Is that one of those things where you're done and you say, oh my God, I'm at Springer Mountain, I'm never going to do this ever again, and then a week later you're at REI going, well, maybe, I don't know.
My brother is a hard pass, although he's never given up. He's never given up his through hiker beard, so
Nice.
he'll often have a big beard.
And I saw he shaved his head, so he's got that going too. That's a look I can appreciate.
Yeah. So he's all set on that. I'm definitely curious. I'd be interested in doing the Pacific Crest Trail out here. I've done some overnighters, but nothing crazy. I dedicated myself to school in the following years. So hopefully I can create a lifestyle where I have a little more freedom to bounce around and take some time off, but I'm working on that for now.
It certainly seems like and one of the messages of the book toward the end is about balances. This is the country we have. We can love it and we can despise parts of it, but how do we live in balance with it? And I really like some of those conversations you had toward the end of the book about that.
Yeah, it's a story of progress, right? Little improvements over time, one degree at a time. And if you there's the old saying that if two ships leave port at the same time and one's going 1 degree one direction and the other one's just heading straight, by the time they go like 100 miles, they're gonna be super far apart. So if we just shift course 1 degree at a time, it might feel like we want to be at the finish line already, but we'll get there. Maybe not us, but for the future generations.
I would say, go ahead there, Jeff.
I was going to say, I think your book, the role Dylan played for you and your other mentor you had, who you refused to give a shout out to, but I think your book will play a role in guiding others in that, making those degrees of shift.
I hope so. Yeah. That was the intention.
Now, I was just saying on just a lighter, maybe more lighter note, I definitely feel like I would like to hang out with Uncle Jerry and your dad. They seem like some cool guys.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that they want to come hike the end with you, but then it's like, no, then we're going to go to some breweries afterwards. That goes right into my style of, a little bit of hiking and then some breweries. I don't know about the 30 miles and then some breweries, but I did like that.
So the whole trail was bookmarked by, on one end, we did the road trip from Wisconsin to Maine, and we hit up, over a dozen breweries, and then paused, we hiked the trail, and then my dad came and picked us up with my Uncle Paul, and then we did maybe like 10 more breweries there.
Nice.
Yeah.
We want you on the podcast to talk about that.
That sounds like a great idea, Jeff. We should think about doing that. That sounds like a great idea.
So really it was just the trail interrupted a brewery tour.
Yeah, I get that. So
yeah.
But, no, I like that. And I like the sentiment. Like I said, one of the other ones I highlighted or underlined was at the end of the book. And you kind of talked about all the people that kind of helped you guys out along the way. And the last sentence or two of that paragraph was that basically people were genuine and generous and beautiful. Everybody was just doing his or her best to get by. People were good. And the trail taught me that much. And I thought that was kind of a nice sentiment. I think that's something that people are striving for nowadays. Like I said, there were things in this book that really hit me with, hey man, we could do some of that now, So I appreciated that sentiment as well.
Yeah. And I just wanted to also mention, it seems like we're winding down, that if anyone's listening to this, I'm going to have a special coupon code for my website, beer, and
nice.
They can get free shipping. So any listeners to this podcast can visit my website at nbhankus.com. Use the coupon code beer and you'll get free shipping, and I'll sign a copy for you.
Perfect.
All right. Excellent. So, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, no, this has been fun.
I enjoyed the talk and your insights.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We've lost Ryan to the dark.
Yeah, Ryan is heading out on the trail. It looks like he's heading out on the trail. Right? He got so inspired, he just took off on the trail right now.
It looks like he's in his recording closet, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm getting there. I had some some I'm guessing fellow hikers decided to get into a conversation behind me in the alley.
Oh, yeah, that happens.
So my outdoor location became an indoor location once I'll hit the lights. I think that's a good point for us to kind of bring it all to a head, though. Jeff, did you want to do an official sign off here? When I say Jeff, I just assume one of the Jeffs knows which one.
He knows you're talking about. No, we do. We know. We're pretty much in each other's mind half the time.
And I know, Nate, you just mentioned your coupon code, but was there any kind of last things about the book that people should know before they jump in and use that coupon code and say, what am I getting into? Anything else about the book you might want to mention?
50% of the proceeds are going towards my nonprofit mission of helping veterans write books. So ultimately, the plan is to open up. I've got a little cottage on my property, a little mother-in-law unit. The plan is to continue fixing that up and open it up to veterans for like a 6-month artistic residency where they'll write a book. And I found the process very healing, and I hope that I can help other veterans through that process. So
very cool.
Buying the book also supports that mission as well.
Well, thank you, listeners, for joining us for the launching of I Like Beer, the book talk. And thank you, Nate Hankus, for not only joining us, but your book. Thank you for your book and your insights. We're looking forward to getting together next month for a book and a beer. Until then, cheers.
Cheers.